As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Next one here, Blinken meets with Chinese President Xi in Beijing. So this article is from the South China Morning Post. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's landmark trip to China ended on Monday with a commitment from both countries to try to stabilize ties to prevent their intensifying rivalry from descending into conflict. So the closely watched two-day visit wrapped up with a meeting between Blinken and Chinese President Xi Jinping, who told the visiting diplomat that the world needed a stable U.S.-China relationship and that the two countries should handle ties with a sense of responsibility. She said, quote, whether China and the U.S. can get along correctly has a bearing on the future and the destiny of humankind, end quote. So she told Blinken that the rivalry between great powers could not solve problems in the United States or challenges facing the world, and the two powers should seek to respect each other's interests. He said, quote, China respects the interests of the United States and will not challenge or replace the United States. Similarly, the United States must also respect China and not harm China's legitimate interests and rights. Neither party can shape the other according to its own wishes, let alone deprive the other of its legitimate right to development, end quote. So the Chinese leader said that countries around the world had aired concerns over worsening U.S.-China ties. And another thing, that was made clear to Blinken while he was there in all the meetings with Wang Yi, who's Xi's top foreign policy advisor, and Qin Gang, who's the Chinese foreign minister, they all said, Taiwan is a red line is basically what they told him. And, while Blinken was there, he did a press conference, and Blinken said that the U.S. does not support Taiwanese independence, which is, longstanding U.S. policy going back decades. That's nothing new. That's been every administration's policy since, 1979, at least, when it was formalized. But that clip went viral online, and, all these stupid people that don't understand, the U.S.-China relationship and the situation over Taiwan, saying that Blinken was, capitulating to the Chinese, or that he gave them the green light to invade Taiwan. Just complete nonsense. I was just surprised how many people don't know anything about this policy and are ready to get all whipped up into a frenzy about Taiwan. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Monday that NATO will not offer a formal invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance at the upcoming summit in Vilnius that will be held from July 11th to the 12th. Next one, the last news story here, the FBI groomed a 16-year-old to become a terrorist. So this is from The Intercept. And this is a story about how the FBI groomed a 16-year-old with brain development issues to become a terrorist. So basically, this 16-year-old, well, actually, he's 18. He was just arrested. Matteo Ventura. He was from Wakefield, Massachusetts. And he had brain development issues. He was bullied in school and he was homeschooled. And an FBI agent befriended him on the internet and got him to send him money, very small amounts of money. They said that he was sending him gift cards worth $25. And they were trying to get him to agree to travel to the Islamic State, I guess, go to Syria or Iraq, wherever, they even really have a foothold now. And, according to this Intercept report, he was making excuses for not going, and they still arrested him. And they said there was a hint that he appeared to be ready to turn in his purported ISIS contact to the FBI. So just complete entrapment for this poor kid, who's now arrested and could face prison time for being a terrorist. But there's so many cases like this. The FBI has done this so much since 9/11. This just seems to be a real blatant example of the kind of things that they do.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Okay, so here's the deal. Summertime's coming. People are going to be spending more. There's going to be more tourism. They're going to go out and travel. Things are going to be taking it easy for a while. It happens all the time. Then comes September. Then you start looking at how much stuff the retailers bought for the holiday season coming up. Then you start looking at the reality of why the equity markets have gone up. Only a handful of companies are driving up the NASDAQ. And then the reality sets in. And that's why your crashes happen in October and in March. March, it's after the holidays. And October's after the summer holidays. So there's going to be a flattening out. Again, the S&P 500 is up over 12%, just as we had forecast. And it's nearing its peak. Gold prices went down because the dollar went up, because the talk is they're going to raise interest rates 2 more times. But are they really going to? Because all they ever say is bullshit. Yep. This is the guy that said inflation was temporary and transitory. And then you read the headline story and Yellen screaming it out as well. How can anybody believe the shit coming out of these people's fucking mouth? How the fuck can you believe them? What the fuck is wrong with you? I believe my kindergarten teacher. I believe I believe the principal of the school. I believe the politicians. I'm a Democrat. I'm a repulsive king. I look up to Mitch McConnell. Oh, no. I like Chucky Schumer. How about that Katson Macron with the fake hair? True dope. The daddy's boy up in Canada. One little fucking freak after another. This thing's going to go down big. It's going to go down hard. And it's going to go down fast. So yeah, gold prices are down because the dollar's up because they're talking about raising interest rates again. And that's the only reason the dollar's strong. And then over there in the UK on Thursday, they may raise interest rates another 25 basis points. Inflation's over 8%. And the same thing in the EU. They raised interest rates last week, but the interest rates are way below the inflation rate. It's still negative interest rates. So this is all temporary. But don't worry, when all else fails, they take you to war.
Does the intelligence community, CIA or any other aspect of it, surveil the president and his wife?
Not officially. So number one, you would have intercepted communications. Well, every presidential phone call is already recorded, intercepted by the communications, White House communications office. So, that's collected. What you get is the informal banter based on briefers, what they've seen. They go back and we'll talk about it, but that's not, to my knowledge, that's never been formally written up. What you don't have is actual units investigating, say, okay, let's delve into, in this case, Joe Biden's contacts with these Ukrainians, and let's see what we can uncover. They get that information in the course of doing work on Ukraine. They may come across and say, "Oh goodness, we've got some uncomfortable ties here, relationships with the president."
So if he gets out of bed in the morning and he can't find his slippers, and he asks Jill to help him find his slippers, that's not going to be picked up by CIA surveillance. In the White House, that's not going to be picked up by CIA surveillance. Okay.
The White House clued in.
Say again?
So the White House are clued in and would comment on that, but not the CIA.
Okay. I remember one of my last conversations with President Trump when he was in the White House. We were talking about pardons, and he was asking my opinion on people he was about to pardon and commute sentences for. And then I reminded him, you're leaving in a couple of weeks, and we had a small talk. And then I reminded him that he promised the American public and me personally in private that he would, while still president, release the JFK files. And he said, no, I can't do it. If they had shown you what they showed me, you wouldn't release it either. What did they show you, and who showed it to you? Now, here's the part of the conversation I want to recount to you. Judge, someday when we're together and 15 people aren't listening to our phone call, I'll tell you what they showed me. Well, now, what does he mean, 15? It may have been his way of speaking. Maybe it's 20, maybe it's 2. But what does he mean, 15 people listening to his phone call? He was calling from the Oval Office.
Right. So you remember when the first impeachment of Trump, when Vindman came and the transcript of his conversation, that's what he's talking about. That is recorded by elements of the Department of Defense. They fall under military chain of command. And so every communication is recorded now. It goes back. There was a period, 60, 70 years ago when the conversations weren't recorded, but that's not the case now. Technology has made it available, so they do get all of that recorded.
Okay. How about his cell phone? He used to call me from his cell phone. Would that be recorded? If he's in the back of the beast, the presidential limo, that's recorded too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. What is the status of the Ukraine offensive as of today, June 20th?
If you could compare, it was promised to be delivered like a Hollywood blockbuster. It'd be to set the world on fire. It's been a flop at the box office. But in this case, what we're talking about, it's been a flop because you've got literally more than 10,000 Ukrainian troops dead, and they have not advanced even to the first line of defense.
We need a peace president. Most people agree that we are closer to nuclear war than at any time since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Some would even argue that we are closer now than we were in those fateful days when Soviet missiles in Cuba almost triggered a nuclear war between the U.S. and the USSR. In those days, we were told that we were in a life or death struggle with communism and thus could not cede a square foot of territory, or the dominoes would fall one by one until the Reds ruled over us. That crisis was very real to me as I was drafted into the military in the middle of the U.S.-USSR standoff over Cuba, and we could all feel how close we were to annihilation. Fortunately, we had a president in the White House at the time who understood the dangers of nuclear brinksmanship. Even though he was surrounded by hawks who could never forgive him for aborting the idiotic Bay of Pigs Cuban invasion, President John F. Kennedy picked up the telephone for a discussion with his Soviet counterpart, Nikita Khrushchev, which eventually saved the world. Historians now tell us that President Kennedy agreed to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Soviets removing missiles from Cuba. It was a classic case of how diplomacy can work if properly employed. It's all too clear that we do not have a John F. Kennedy in the White House today. Although we no longer face a Soviet empire and a communist ideology as justification for taking a confrontational tone toward Russia, the Biden administration is still dragging the U.S. toward a nuclear conflict. Why are they putting us all at risk? The same old domino theory that was discredited in the Cold War? If we don't fight Russia down to the last Ukrainian, Putin will soon be marching through Berlin. This all started with Biden's promising to only send uniforms and medical supplies to Ukraine for fear of sparking a Russian retaliation. From there, we went to anti-tank missiles, multiple rocket launchers, Patriot missiles, Bradley fighting vehicles, and millions of rounds of ammunition. The Biden administration announced last week that it would send depleted uranium ammunition to Ukraine, which poisons the earth for millennia to come. Rumors are that long-range missiles are to be delivered soon, which could strike deep into Russia. Apparently, F-16 fighter jets are also on the way. The escalation rationale from Washington, we are told, is that since the Russians have not directly retaliated against NATO for NATO's direct support of Ukraine's war machine, we can be sure they never will respond. Is that really a wise bet? It is clear to many that U.S.-built F-16 fighters taking off from NATO bases with NATO pilots attacking Russians in Ukraine, or even Russia itself, would be a declaration of war on Russia. That means World War III, something we managed to avoid for the whole Cold War. Congress is silent or compliant as we lurch forward toward disaster for no discernible U.S. strategic goal. Biden, or whoever is actually running the government, is forging straight ahead. As we move into the U.S. presidential election cycle, one thing is clear. We desperately need a peace president to do for us what JFK did for the U.S. during the Cuba crisis. Hopefully, it won't be too late. Thanks for listening.
We can put that up. To resolve tax issues, gun charge. Just made a little plea deal, no big deal. Zero Hedge wrote it up. We can look at the next one. This is basically the meat of what's going on here. Hunter, 53, is now expected to plead guilty of 2 misdemeanor tax charges of failure to pay 2017 and 2018, combined tax liability of roughly $1.2 million. He'll also admit to illegally possessing a weapon after his 2018 purchase of a handgun, which will likely result in a diversion program, which would result in the removal of the gun charge if the program's conditions are met. In total, he'll likely receive 2 years probation for diversion conditions. Now, you mentioned Trump in your opening statement. It really is hard, and maybe we're biased, I don't know, I don't think we are. It's hard to look at what Trump faces. 400 years in prison for a few documents to Biden for these things, as we know, the tip of the iceberg, facing just literally a slap on the wrist.
And once again, the people involved, like say with January 6th, I mean, we had intense hearings about this, but any evidence that might have given a fair balance on who did what there, that was excluded. And people more and more will become knowing it was nothing more but a cover up there and made use of. But the deal that they made is something that might still. The deal itself, people who are knowledgeable will know that's a negative. They won't see that as a negative. But maybe there's some others who just barely look at that and say, aha, he was guilty. Yeah. And he didn't pay his taxes or something like that. So there'll be some people that'll, because this is big news right now, there's still a few people out here that could care less about this whole thing. And some days I wished I could care less about it too. But it's just the stuff that goes on where it's realized by more and more people, this is not equal justice.
Some of the things that are not involved are the alleged payments, and this is from Zero Hedge. Spoiler, none of the charges involves Hunter's role as an international bagman for the Biden family, alleged of course, which included a $10 million payment from Burisma to Hunter and Joe Biden, according to the FBI's source. And go to the next one, here's some further clarification of how it came to be that we're not talking about this. The federal investigation into Hunter Biden began in 2018 and initially centered around Hunter Biden's finances related to overseas business ties and consulting work. Over time, and I've highlighted this part, over time, the international business dealings were dropped from the investigation, perhaps due to Joe Biden's alleged involvement, and the focus shifted to Hunter's failure to report his income, as well as lying on the paperwork to purchase a gun in 2018, possibly. So these things just sort of quietly went away. The Justice Department was asked whether they're still looking into it. They said, yes, it's still under investigation, so don't hold your breath. But here's what they're not talking about, and this came out a few days ago. This is a top Republican on the Justice Committee, I think. If you put this next one, this is from the Daily Mail, and this is something that's probably a lot more important than buying a gun and not paying the taxes. Top Republican James Comer says new Biden bank records will show that the family accepted between $20 and $30 million from foreign nationals. He's the Oversight Committee chair. Sorry, I stand corrected. But he's claiming that through this whistleblower and through their own investigations, they're seeing $20 to $30 million in their bank accounts through these different shell companies that have benefited the Bidens. So this is the containment. They want to contain this, so they'll admit to the tax stuff, I think.
Yes, maybe they can simplify this and say, "Oh, you're a bunch of crybabies," just because Trump couldn't hire a good attorney. But Biden got some good attorneys. But I think there's another factor way through that whole. I don't think the attorneys probably they were around, but the ones who were making the wheeling and dealing weren't the average attorney that goes to represent these people. But Trump has had his trouble with attorneys and things like this.
And employees. The U.S. has basically kicked Cuba in the face for 60 years, done everything we could to try to kill the leaders, all kinds of crazy stuff for 60 years. And now he put up this next clip. By doing this, we've isolated Cuba. Cuba doesn't look to the U.S. as an ally or a friend or even someone to negotiate with. If you can put this next note. And this really underscores the failure of U.S. diplomacy, which is always one-sided. This is from the Wall Street Journal article. Discussions for the facility on Cuba's northern coast are at an advanced stage but not concluded, U.S. intelligence reports suggest. The Biden administration has contacted Cuban officials to try to forestall the deal. Again, after 60 years of kicking them in the face. Do they really think that a phone call saying, hey guys, don't let the Chinese in, we mean it? You think that Cuba's going to say, oh, you've been so nice to us, okay, that's a deal. They're going to say, no, we want the Chinese. We want to have a tough big brother as our ally here to protect us. So it really is a failure of the entire U.S. approach to the rest of the world, I think.
Yeah, well, it is a big deal as far as I'm concerned, and this is not going to be resolved with maybe sending our top diplomat over there.
Anthony.
Maybe we just need more diplomats. Like I used to sort of kid and say, we have an umpteen number of diplomats, a lot of them. Why don't we ever use them? Because I think they've lost the whole notion of what a diplomat. A diplomat is nothing more than somebody who promotes their own set of standards and their own lives. But that's the whole thing is the CIA too. The CIA are essentially in the embassies around the world. And I had somebody in the family that was not a close family member, but was worked in an embassy, and he verified. He says any embassy I've ever been in, you learn who the CIA agents are. They have them there. Getting information and helping us be safe.
Helping democracy. You guys like it, I'm sure that the distance is not lost on the Chinese, but you mentioned sending our top diplomat over to China. Well, we did that this week and skip ahead to that tweet from Stephen Roach. which is interesting because Blinken's long delayed trip to China finally took place. This is him speaking with the Chinese foreign minister, but he had a very short meeting. This is Stephen Roach, who wrote by diplomatic drive-by. Blinken and Xi met only for 35 minutes, one of the shortest high-level meetings on record. Consecutive translation cuts the exchange in half, leaving less than 10 minutes of perfunctory speaking time. It was a very short trip. Blinken, as usual, looked like he had a case of indigestion, which is possible. You never know. But here's what happened if you look at the next one. This is from our friends over at Moon, Alabama. They point out that Blinken walked out of his meeting with Xi. It seemed like someone read him the riot act. He did not look happy. And here's what he said. He said, the United States will not support Taiwan breaking away from China. Amid a series of confusing statements by Biden on the issue. We do not support Taiwan independence, America's top diplomat said in Beijing after meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. If you remember, Biden said a few times, we're going to defend Taiwan, we're going to defend Taiwan. The rhetoric has been escalating and escalating, and all of a sudden, he walks out of a couple-minute meeting with Xi and says, no, we're not going to do that.
We should refer to the meeting as a low-level meeting, a diplomatic meeting, because they've diminished themselves as far as importance goes. But, it still should strike more Americans and ask the question, why are we over there? Provoking and looking for trouble. And that's not like in the neighborhood. It's not like the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
But China might want the Gulf of Mexico to be like the South China Sea. And there's a lot of, waterways that are very close to a lot of the United States. Oh, we wouldn't tolerate that for a minute. And yet here we are. We've done this for years, but it's way back. You said 60 years. It's been back as long as our country has existed that we have been involved and had a little war over it too.
Yeah.
So that to me is a real pity, because I think if a country had a foreign policy where the principle would be mind our own business. That's what we do with our neighbors at home. You mind your own business and stay out of trouble. And how do you stay friends with people that you might disagree with for various reasons? Just avoid it. Don't try to reform everybody you run into. That leads to trouble. But that's what happens to an empire. I think what we're witnessing now is the beginning of the end of the American empire, the end of the American reserve currency, the dollar reserve currency of the world, and also the empire that's going to end will cause a lot of ramifications. This stuff will get sorted out. If there's chaos that we hope and pray we can help, cancel that out and not have it. You can imagine if local people had been allowed, just because nobody had the strength or the energy and the money to interfere in Ukraine. Maybe the Russian-speaking Ukrainians and the others that were European-speaking people, maybe they would have gotten together.
Yeah.
It would be more likely, because they would both have an interest. Now it's international, it's NATO, it's the United States, it's the military-industrial complex, on, and then it builds. The descent builds. Look at we try to explain at least where the Russians are coming from, not to identify with their policies as much as where they're coming from, and they have every reason to say that they can justify morally that when NATO moves up to their boundaries, they're up to no good.
Now, on this basis, Parmenides drew a number of systematic deductions. Here they are. Number one, the universe must be uncreated. Could never have come into existence. Why? Well, if there was an origin, a beginning to what is, then what existed before? Well, if it wasn't what is, it had to be what is not. But what is not is not. There is no nothing. And therefore, there could never have been a state of nothing preceding the state of something. In other words, the universe must always have existed. It could not have been created. So much for the religious view. Now, I may say that on the basis of this reasoning, no Greek philosopher ever believed the universe was created out of nothing. That is a distinctively and exclusively Jewish Christian doctrine, never accepted by the most mystical Greeks on the basis of Parmenides' principle. Secondly, in the other direction, the universe must be indestructible. It could never go out of existence, because if it went out of existence, meaning by the universe, of course, everything which is, what would be left? What is not. But what is not and can never be. And therefore, the universe must be indestructible. It always will exist. Now, if you put these 2 points together, we can say that according to Parmenides, the universe is therefore eternal. It has no beginning and no end. Third point, focusing now within the universe. Can there be such a thing as a vacuum, as an empty space, completely empty now, a real little zero inside the physical world? To which Parmenides answers, absolutely not. What is not is not. All there is what is, and therefore there's no such thing as a real vacuum. As this was later came to be expressed in Latin, the universe is a plenum, P-L-E-N-U-M, which means it is solidly packed. The actual word means full. It's completely full. There's no little holes in it, no little spaces, no little nothings. It's one big slab of stuff. Huge ball of tightly packed matter. Now, for other reasons which are irrelevant, he happened to believe that it had the shape of a sphere, apparently because he thought there was no good reason why it should bulge in one direction and not the other. But that's beside the point. Well, so far, I've given you several of his deductions. His principle, what is really the basic law of logic, and in that sense, he's sometimes called the father of logic. Although that's pretty indirect, because he didn't know that it had anything to do with thinking as a principle of guiding thinking. He certainly launched an all-out attack on Heraclitus and raised hell with religion. So he's made a good start. But Parmenides drew another deduction from his basic principle, which in his opinion was just as obvious as all the preceding ones. And that's where all the trouble comes in. He drew as a fourth conclusion the idea that change is impossible. Change of any kind. Motion, alteration, occurrence of any kind. And therefore, according to his viewpoint, there is no such thing as talking, moving, writing, swimming, planets orbiting the sun. All of that is a gigantic illusion. Now, why? How did he draw such a conclusion? Well, take a simple example of change, and to vary it, I won't make it to match. Let's take a seed growing into a flower. Now, at the beginning of the change, the seed represents what is. What about the flower at the beginning? Flower is not. At the end of the change, what happened to the seed? It's gone. It's what is not. What happened to the flower? Well, of course, it's now there. It's what is. And that, of course, is true in every change. Something goes away and something comes to be. What does it mean then? Change is a double violation, he concluded, of his principle. Every change is a simultaneous passage from what is to what is not, and from the other aspect, from what is not to what is. But there is no what is not, and you can't think about what is not, and therefore, out. Change, according to him, is just as irrational as the idea of the universe being created or going out of existence. It involves reference to what is not, and what is not is not. Therefore, he concluded, there is no change at all. The world is completely motionless in every respect. Now, you see here that there is a sense in which he is in complete agreement with Heraclitus. Both of them agree with the following crucial viewpoint. Change implies a contradiction. Change implies a violation of logic. Heraclitus, from the aspect that at the end of the change the thing is and isn't what it was, and Parmenides from the aspect that at the end of the change you have what is not becoming what is and vice versa, and that's a contradiction since what is not is not. Now, given this common premise, they of course take diametrically opposite views. Heraclitus says, change is obvious, therefore to hell with logic. Parmenides says, logic is obvious, therefore to hell with change. But the common denominator is you have to make your choice. It's either logic or change, either identity or change.